So in this webinar, we're going to talk about capacity building. We had discussed this on February 17, 2017 with the statewide leadership team during a Zoom session, and I'm making this recording for those of you that were unable to attend. So where you will find the slide deck for the presentation is on the statewide mathematics leadership team site. And so when you're on this screen here from the home page, you'll go down here under our Q&A sessions, and then you'll see on February 17th where we talked about the capacity building. And if you click on this link right here, it should open up to the slide deck that we used for that day. So first, we wanted to start by being interactive during the chat, and I explained a little bit why we are using a coaching framework. The reason that we use the coaching framework by Pete Hall is because the research shows that teachers can really get great support through that coaching model. And his framework offers us a framework to actually couch our statewide work, because most of us, whenever we work with districts, we are in fact coaching them and trying to coach them up so that they have the necessary information that they need to know as they work with students to increase student achievement. So within Pete Hall's framework, there are 4 stages, and there is an unaware stage, a conscious stage, an action stage, and a refinement stage. And this is important to remember because anytime we work with district teams, or we're doing any sort of professional development, or even having a discussion in a PLC, we have members that are in each of these different stages. So we might have somebody in an unaware, a couple in the conscious, some in the action, and some in the refinement. We also might have a situation to where we don't have anybody in some of them. So maybe just the educators that we're working with are in the conscious, action, and refinement. That's possible. So any arrangement of these different stages can show up whenever we work with educators. So the next slide talks about capacity building, and the goal with the unaware stage is to build deeper awareness of student content and pedagogy. And so I use this little picture to be like, maybe the person just doesn't even know that it exists. Then the second was the conscious stage. And this is during the conscious stage. So say, like, for example, with principles to action, the person has heard of principles to action, so they're no longer unaware. But the goal in this stage is to work with greater intentionality in addressing student needs, content, and pedagogical practices. The goal of the action stage is to build on experience and help strengthen expertise through accurate assessment of instructional impact. And the refinement stage is to encourage long-term growth, continued reflection through responsiveness to ongoing assessments. So in this session, we talked in depth about the unaware stage. And again, this is to build deeper awareness of students' content and pedagogy. So in later webinars, we will discuss the conscious, the action, and the refinement stages. So what we did that morning is I said in the chat, think about some time that you have something that you have a deep understanding of about related to your work. So at this time, if you're doing this independently, this would be a good time to stop the recording and pause on that. Next, we thought of a time that we tried to coach somebody who had never heard of the thing from the previous slide we were trying to coach them up about. So again, this would be a good time to pause the slide, to pause the recording. Then I asked, what did you have to think about before you tried to coach them up? Because if they've never heard of something before and you're going to start the discussion, you can't just start from what you know, right? You have to start from where they're at. So again, I would encourage you to pause this recording before moving on to the next slide. Now, think about a time that you have tried to coach something to a group that you were not sure about their level of understanding. So you're not really sure where people are at. You're not sure, have they heard of this? Do they know about it, and are they trying to do it? Are they implementing it and they're trying to refine it? So again, I would encourage you to pause the slide and think about that before moving on to the next slide. So pause the recording. And so then I asked, did you change how you approach the situation? So as you thought, I'm not really sure about what they know, and I could have people at every different stage, reflect on some changes that you perhaps implemented in that work that you did with those educators. Again, this would be a good time to pause the recording before moving on to the next slide. So in the chat, I asked those participants that attended online about teachers' tendencies. So think about a person in the group that has no idea what you're going to be telling them about. What are some tendencies that you might see from the person? For example, defines problem or challenges inaccurately. So if they're unaware, then they might not have the same perspective that everybody else does. So again, this would be a good time to pause the recording before moving on to the next slide. Teacher tendencies in the unaware stage. So here are some suggestions from Pete Hall. So those teachers demonstrate little or no awareness of intentional reality in the classroom. They might engage in little or no self-initiated reflection. They might define problems or challenges inaccurately, and they might see surface level events and classroom elements. Additionally, they might not really collaborate with colleagues very frequently. They might have more of a focus on routine. They might exhibit the best of intentions, and they might express confusion about their own role in learning. And the focus is on the job itself and the act of teaching. Then we talked about the different strategies that we might use with that educator who's in the unaware stage. So still thinking about the person in that group that is unaware, what are some strategies that you might use with them? Perhaps you might celebrate successes immediately. So this is a time when you could pause again in the recording before moving on to the next slide. So here are some suggestions of some different strategies from Pete Hall. You might make frequent contact, checking in often to talk about goals and progress toward them. Build confidence through short-term goal setting. Celebrate successes immediately. Model a strategy or lesson. Whisper coach while co-observing another teacher's class. Write lesson plans together. Co-teach a lesson or debrief a lesson together. I'm sure there are many others that you can think of as well. You may also record a lesson, provide clear look-fors, and debrief the video together, or engage on a side-by-side reflective journaling. One of the things I like about recording a lesson is it's okay to allow an educator to watch that themselves and then just debrief through the reflection of it. So then we talked about transformational feedback. So still thinking about that person in the group that's unaware, what are some feedback statements that you might make? For example, your lesson was successful today because blank. So this again would be a good time to pause the recording before moving on to the next slide. Here are some suggestions from Pete Hall. So he said that they could also be known as directive statements. So when you did blank, the students did blank. It worked because blank. Do that again. There are more examples here, and just for convenience, because they would not fit on the slide, I put several of them here. So feel free to pause the tape and go into this through the slide deck and read these. And I will go ahead and show them all on the screen. So if you just want to pause the recording here, you can before moving on. So then the next part that we talked about was strategic support. Still thinking about that person that is in the group that's unaware. What are some strategies that you might use? And I like to think about these. What are some strategies that you might use to engage them? So for example, you might assign a specific task during the meeting. So again, this would be a good time to pause the tape, the recording, before moving on to the next slide. So some suggestions from Pete Hall were to front load the upcoming content meeting with an article, video, or one-to-one discussion, debrief immediately following the meeting to support understanding and next steps, facilitate collegial idea sharing through professional learning protocols, and strategically partner this teacher with a colleague, in particular, one in the action stage, to build reflective capacity. So that is the end of the unaware stage and the different strategies and feedback tools that you can use with that particular person. Again, I tried to include little images like this one was, so maybe a strategy is to front load. So this is a front loaded washer. Here, this is about them, give them something specific to do. So I hope that images help you to understand these better. And then in the next webinar, we will talk about those that are in the conscious stage.